The office smelled the same. Industrial coffee, copier toner, cheap cologne. I hadn't been back in 2 weeks, but it felt like 2 years. The world hadn't stopped just because mine had. I walked past the front desk without speaking. I didn't trust my voice yet. My son's favorite action figure was still in my coat pocket, where I'd kept it since the night he was taken from me in a sterile hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and endings. I told myself I was ready, that I could do this, but my heels felt too loud against the marble floor. My cardigan hung looser on shoulders that hadn't carried a full night's sleep in weeks. My smile, when I tried it, cracked at the edges. Martin's assistant waved me into the conference room with a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I knew that look, pity dressed as professionalism. Martin stood when I entered, as if the gesture could soften what he was about to say. "Emily," he began, tone heavy with manufactured sympathy. "First, let me just say how sorry we all are. What you've gone through, no one should ever have to." He paused, watching for my reaction. I gave him none. "But," he continued, lowering his voice like he was delivering bad news about a stock report, "we've noticed a shift, understandably, of course. You've been not quite yourself." I waited. He cleared his throat. "This isn't personal. You just don't bring the same energy. It's been affecting team morale." There it was. Not quite yourself. The corporate euphemism for grieving too visibly, for not pretending well enough. "I see," I said quietly. "We're going to have to let you go. Human Resources has prepared a standard package. Severance, extended benefits, the usual. Take whatever time you need to collect your things." I nodded, just once. He seemed relieved I didn't cry. But what Martin didn't know, what he hadn't even bothered to ask, was that I'd buried my son with one hand while reviewing internal audit reports with the other, that I'd spent nights holding my child through seizures while finalizing compliance summaries on 2 hours of sleep. I didn't fall apart then. I wouldn't now. They said it was a performance issue, that I wasn't meeting expectations, that my energy had shifted. They didn't say what they really meant, that I was inconvenient now, that my presence was a reminder of something raw and human they didn't want to look at. I wasn't grieving the right way. I wasn't hiding it well enough. What they didn't see, what no one in that glass tower ever saw, was the year that came before. The 12 months of emergency room visits, of whispered conversations with specialists in overcrowded waiting rooms, of juggling late-night meetings with client leads, while my son slept in a hospital bed beside me, monitors blinking quietly. I never missed a deadline, never pushed off a report, never once asked for a reduced workload. And not because the company offered support, they didn't. There was no bereavement policy for anticipatory grief, just tight smiles and thin reassurances that family comes first from executives who would quietly dock you for every missed hour. There were nights I presented project briefs from pediatric oncology lounges, days I typed quarterly updates from the passenger seat of an ambulance. I wore waterproof mascara so the tears wouldn't show during back-to-back client calls. Not that anyone ever asked. Martin never once visited. Not when I took a leave of absence for the funeral. Not when I sent the email saying simply, "He's gone. I'll return in 2 weeks." His response had been 3 words, "Take your time," followed by the meeting invite that led to my dismissal. I was no longer a good look for the brand. That much was clear. Smiles were part of the dress code. Emotional containment required. I'd broken the unspoken rule. Don't bleed where people can see. The worst part wasn't the firing. It was what it symbolized. Like my grief made them uncomfortable. Like my son's life and death were stains I was supposed to scrub clean before walking back through those glass doors. I wasn't just being let go, I was being erased. But they had no idea what I'd seen while working 12-hour days and living in hospital rooms. No clue what I'd found while reviewing financial logs during the nights I couldn't sleep. I wasn't gone, not yet. The HR rep, someone I'd trained during her onboarding, met me in the small side conference room usually reserved for performance reviews and uncomfortable conversations. She smiled like she was offering condolences at a wake, clipboard in hand, folder already open. "I know this is a difficult time," she said, placing a stack of papers between us. "So we've prepared everything to make the transition as smooth as possible." I nodded, said nothing. She slid the packet across the table. Thick, cream-colored paper, blue-tabbed signatures, legalese dressed in soft font, standard NDA, mutual non-disparagement, confidentiality clauses, waiver of claims, and buried near the end, a statement that I would not pursue any pending or potential actions, internal or legal, related to my employment. It wasn't severance, it was a muzzle. I flipped through the pages slowly, letting the silence stretch. I didn't miss the way her eyes flicked toward the clock. HR always moved quickly. End it clean, minimize mess. "I'd like some time to review," I said, tapping the top page with my index finger. "Oh, of course," she replied, caught off guard. "Most people prefer to just, well, get it over with." I offered her a pleasant smile. "I'm not most people." She blinked, recovering. "Well, legally, you have 7 days. Just let us know if you have any questions." I closed the folder carefully, slid it into my bag, and stood. "I will." Her relief was almost palpable. She thought the hardest part was over, that I'd take my grief and go quietly, that I'd vanish like a bad memory and leave the brand intact. They thought I was too broken to fight. What they didn't realize was that I'd already started sharpening the knives. I wasn't just the woman in compliance. I was the compliance officer, the one who built the internal reporting protocols, rewrote the ethics code from scratch, and trained senior leadership on how to avoid liability without breaking the law. And I knew where everything lived. The off-books payments hidden in innocuous vendor lines, the subcontractor files rerouted through shell companies, the miscellaneous marketing spend that funded a suspicious number of personal travel expenses. They didn't think I noticed. But in the sleepless nights after my son died, I started digging, because grief needs an outlet, and mine chose truth. The first red flag was a contractor invoice for a company that didn't exist 6 months earlier, now billing 10 times the industry standard. Then came the bonus authorization forms signed after budget freezes, expense reports that didn't line up, whispered concerns forwarded by employees who had no idea their anonymous complaints had landed on my desk. Martin had spent years perfecting the art of plausible deniability, but I had everything. Time-stamped logins, audit trails. The paper ghosts no one expected anyone to chase down. They'd fired me to protect morale, but morale wasn't their problem. Fraud was. And in trying to erase me, they'd overlooked one critical fact. You don't hand your secrets to the woman whose job was to protect them, then expect her to disappear. They thought I was grief-stricken. They were half right. The other half was done playing nice. They assumed I'd fade, that I'd take my folder of boilerplate apologies, sign away my voice, and vanish. But grief does strange things. Some people collapse, others rebuild. I weaponized mine. In the week before my official separation date, I still had access. My credentials active, my email untouched, my systems unflagged. A loophole they hadn't thought to close. I wasn't marked as a threat. Just a sad woman who used to be useful. I became methodical, detached. First, I searched by project code, then by vendor alias, then by internal billing chains I'd helped create. I knew which files to look for, which redacted contracts to piece together, which names were real and which were placeholders meant to obscure liability. I wasn't stealing information. I was preserving evidence. Every email chain, every signed expense report, every digital signature tied to Martin's executive account. I documented quietly, screenshotting discrepancies and saving versions of files before they were cleaned. I traced payments to shell companies that shared a mailing address with Martin's cousin's LLC. I found evidence of regulatory bypasses masked as pilot program exemptions. By Wednesday, I had enough to raise questions. By Friday, I had enough to raise alarms. Everything was stored on a personal encrypted drive, disconnected from cloud access, protected by multiple redundancies. Paper copies lived in a safety deposit box under my maiden name. Digital backups were split across 2 external drives, hidden in plain sight. Not paranoia, preparation. They fired me for not looking the part of recovery, but grief had given me clarity. They took my child. I wouldn't let them take my silence, too. Her name was Dana. We hadn't spoken in nearly 3 years, but I still had her number stored under D Ethics, a relic from her time in legal before she'd left for something less soul-killing. She picked up on the second ring. "Emily?" she asked, voice careful. "You okay?" "No," I said honestly, "but I'm ready." Dana now worked with a corporate accountability nonprofit that specialized in whistleblower support and investigative referrals. When I told her what I'd found, she didn't ask if I was sure. She just said, "Come in." By the following week, I was sitting in a quiet office downtown, across from a whiteboard covered in timelines, names, and case numbers. Dana brought in Claire, an employment attorney with a background in corporate retaliation cases, and Lena, a former investigative journalist now freelancing for 3 national outlets. I handed them my drive. Claire scanned the folder structure like she was reading a blueprint. "Jesus," she muttered, "this isn't just shady, this is systemic." "It gets worse," I replied, opening the file labeled Cross-Reference, Audit Suppression 2023. Lena looked up. "Do you want to go public?" "Eventually," I said, "but first, I want it airtight." We filed the whistleblower complaint within 72 hours, federal level, full documentation, legally protected under compliance and fraud statutes. Claire submitted the claim under sealed confidentiality, using every protection afforded by the law. It was no longer just personal. Now, it was procedural, official. Lena started building the narrative, confirming names, timelines, and relationships, preparing a piece that would remain unpublished until the right moment. Dana arranged mental health and legal resources, no questions asked. "We'll cover every angle," she said, her voice steady. "They won't see you coming." I nodded. Martin had fired me thinking I was done. He had no idea this was just the beginning. The severance folder sat untouched on my kitchen counter for 5 days. I hadn't opened it since the day HR slid it across the table with that soft, "We wish you the best" smile. On the 6th day, I opened it. Not to sign, just to see the shape of what they thought I was worth. 4 months of severance, health coverage until spring, a mutual non-disparagement clause, no admission of wrongdoing, and a clause tucked near the bottom in legal gray font. Employee agrees to waive any and all claims known or unknown at the time of execution. A gentle burial. It was written to look like kindness. But I knew better. It was insurance, silence purchased at a discount. That morning, I drafted a short, polite response. Subject, severance agreement. Dear HR contact, thank you for the documents. After review with counsel, I will not be signing the agreement. Please forward all future communication to my attorney. Warm regards, Emily Bennett. I copied Claire, my attorney, into the email. Hit send. Then I waited. The response from HR arrived 5 hours later. Strained professionalism barely masked the panic. Thank you for your note, Emily. We acknowledge receipt. Please know our intention was never to pressure you. We wish you the best in this difficult time. Martin didn't respond directly. Of course he didn't. But Dana called me the next day. Your CEO just hired a crisis PR firm, she said. He's preparing for something. He should be, I replied. They'd expected a quiet exit, a grief-stricken mother grateful for crumbs and closure. Instead, I gave them paperwork, legal shields, and a fuse, and that fuse was about to burn. The headline appeared just before noon, buried halfway down a business news site most executives scan during lunch. Employee fired weeks after child's death files. Whistleblower complaint against major tech firm. The article was vague, by design. No names, no logos, just enough detail to spark recognition in the right circles. Sources familiar with the matter allege the company in question dismissed the employee for performance-related concerns, despite her recent personal tragedy and years of high-level compliance work. It was Lena's writing, clear, clinical, surgical. The piece referenced a pending federal investigation into financial misconduct. It outlined a timeline. It described retaliation patterns. It didn't accuse, yet, but it raised eyebrows in boardrooms and inboxes. By 3 p.m., the article was trending on LinkedIn. Quietly, then louder. The comments began filling up. If this is who I think it is, this company has a problem. Fired for grieving, that's disgusting. Following closely, something tells me this is just the beginning. By 6 p.m., I had over 200 new messages, many from strangers, some from former colleagues, and more than a few from other women, other mothers. One read simply, "I was fired the week after my daughter's funeral. They said I wasn't showing up emotionally. Thank you for speaking up. We're behind you." I sat in silence for a long time after that. Not out of sadness, but because I realized something Martin never did. They weren't just afraid of the facts. They were afraid of the voice that came with them, and mine had just gone public. Martin always loved the top-floor conference room, floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek walnut table, a skyline backdrop that made him feel invincible. That Monday, it became his battlefield. The board of directors had called an emergency session, not to strategize, to interrogate. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. The updates came from Dana's network, from Lena's sources, and from an anonymous email that arrived in my inbox at 9:42 a.m. He's rattled. They're asking for a list of all internal investigations buried under performance issues. Several directors want external review. Legal is present. The article had been out less than a week, but whispers moved faster than press cycles. The board had seen the leaked documents. They'd also seen the impact. Major clients asking quiet questions, former employees hinting at NDAs, and worse, Martin's own emails, the ones I'd saved. The ones where he greenlit reclassifying vendor payments to innovation grants. The ones where he approved internal resolution for ethics flags that should have gone to legal. The board didn't care about grief, but they cared about risk, and Martin had become one. By noon, he'd stopped responding to emails. By 3 p.m., I received a formal request from an outside firm representing the company's audit committee. Ms. Bennett, we'd like to schedule a conversation regarding your documentation and timeline. You are not under investigation. This is voluntary, but your cooperation is strongly encouraged. I forwarded it to Claire. Let's talk, I wrote. Martin had fired me to protect morale. Now, morale was the least of his concerns. By Wednesday, 3 clients had paused contracts. 2 investors requested emergency calls with the board. A major consulting partner announced a temporary reassessment of alignment values. The language was corporate. The message wasn't. The ship was leaking, and no one wanted to be the last one bailing water. Staff turnover spiked. Internally, they called it attrition. But the truth was obvious. People were jumping. Mid-level managers, senior designers, even the quietly loyal assistant who had slipped the severance folder across the table just 2 weeks earlier. My inbox filled with anonymous tips. They're wiping internal drives. Someone's trying to backdate vendor contracts. Legal just pulled 6 people into silent HR meetings. And on LinkedIn, the euphemisms began. After 4 amazing years, I've decided to explore new opportunities. Some exciting changes ahead. Thrilled for what's next. One post simply read, "Toxic cultures rot from the top. It's always fascinating how long people pretend not to smell it. The company was hemorrhaging. People, clients, credibility. Lena's second article was in final edits. Claire had filed a supplemental complaint with updated findings. And the external investigators? They weren't requesting anymore. They were demanding. Martin had built a kingdom of fear, of performance metrics, of cold calculations. He never imagined what it would look like when the people stopped performing. But I had. And this was only the beginning. The exposé dropped at 7:02 a.m. Lena didn't warn me. She didn't need to. We'd already reviewed the quotes, the timelines, the documentation. The headline hit like a slow-burning fuse. Fired while grieving. How one tech executive buried ethics to protect his bottom line. Martin's name was in the subheading. So was mine. The article was clinical, unsparing. It opened with a timeline, my son's passing, my return to work, my dismissal days later. Then came the receipts, screenshots of internal memos referencing emotional instability as a liability, email chains approving hush agreements, invoices linked to shell accounts. Lena quoted anonymous employees. One said Martin had joked, "We need cheerleaders, not trauma cases." Another claimed he referred to my departure as a clean break for culture. But it wasn't just about me, it was about the corruption I'd exposed. Misappropriated funds, fraudulent filings, ethical complaints rerouted to dead inboxes. The company was named in full, no abbreviations, no euphemisms. By 10 a.m., the article had been reposted over 60,000 times. It trended on Twitter, LinkedIn, Reddit. The comments came in waves. This is why people don't trust leadership. As a mother, I'm shaking with anger. She lost her child and still had the strength to stand up. That's not grief, that's power. News anchors started calling, podcasts, advocacy groups. I declined most interviews, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because Lena had already said it perfectly. I wasn't the headline, I was the catalyst. And for the first time since I buried my son, I felt like he was being seen, not as a footnote to my performance review, but as part of the reason I stood up in the first place. They'd fired me for grieving. Now I was the face of accountability. Martin resigned the next day. The official statement called it a personal decision to explore new opportunities. But the board's private vote had been unanimous. Investors were done. Partners wouldn't return calls until he was gone. He left through the back door, no send-off, no catered lunch, just a resignation letter crafted by legal, signed under pressure. The company issued a public apology the following week. It was polished, carefully worded, clearly reviewed by 3 departments and 2 PR firms. It acknowledged my experience. It didn't deny the findings. It didn't mention my name. But it didn't need to. The industry already knew. Claire finalized the lawsuit settlement 2 days after that. Confidential in some areas, loud in others. 7 figures, and a public-facing clause that directed 20% of the sum to a national nonprofit that supports grieving parents returning to work. It was non-negotiable. They agreed without argument. Their silence finally was honest. I didn't post about the win, didn't issue a statement. No humble brags or soft victory laps. Instead, I sent a quiet email to a contact at the nonprofit with the subject line, "This is for them." Underneath was the transfer confirmation. Martin thought my grief made me weak. What he never understood is that grief is not the absence of power. Sometimes it's where power begins. The room was quiet, not with disinterest, but with attention. Corporate ethics conferences weren't known for emotional resonance, but today was different. The chairs were filled, the lights dimmed just slightly. And in the front row sat a dozen people who hadn't looked away when things got hard. Compliance officers, advocates, HR professionals who still believed the work could mean something. I stood at the podium, a soft amber spotlight illuminating pages I no longer needed to read from. It had been 1 year. Not since the lawsuit, not since Martin stepped down or the apology hit the press. 1 year since I'd returned to my desk after burying my son and been told my presence made people uncomfortable. Grief, it turned out, was not welcome in glass buildings with branded coffee mugs and polished mission statements. But it had followed me anyway, into the boardrooms, into the legal filings, into the articles that spread across news feeds like wildfire. And now, here. I took a slow breath, then began. "I'm not here to talk about revenge," I said. "I'm here to talk about humanity." A pause. We train employees how to optimize, how to scale, how to perform under pressure, but we rarely train leaders how to sit across from someone who is breaking and treat them like a person instead of a liability. No one moved. We like to say, "Bring your whole self to work," but what we mean is, bring the palatable parts, leave the grief, leave the anger, leave the inconvenient emotions in the parking lot. I scanned the room, met the eyes that were brave enough to hold mine. I didn't want to fight, I admitted, but I also didn't want my son's life to become a line item someone quietly deleted from a spreadsheet. The silence held, like reverence. When we stand up, even when broken, we remind people that ethics aren't abstract. They're personal, they're human, and sometimes they're born out of pain. After the panel, several people came up. They didn't talk about policy. They talked about loss, about shame, about survival, about staying quiet for too long. I didn't feel victorious, but I felt seen, and that was enough to begin again. He thought I was weak because I cried. He didn't realize I was strongest when I refused to stay silent,